Now that he knew about the ghost girl, the old building suddenly felt really eerie. It was colder than the main building, even with the air conditioning blasting throughout it. He took his time, really looking at the structure and the halls. He just walked through it yesterday without thinking about it too much, which was probably why it felt so different now. The walls were covered in cobwebs, and it was no longer a white color, but now more like a dark cream. There were almost no lockers, but a few were still standing against the wall, dented and dirty. The ground was full of dust and even a few leaves that had blown inside through the broken windows. It really did look like a scene in a haunted movie. The school did not care about it anymore, since the new part of the building now held the main classrooms and such. But the janitor still came to store his stuff, or some other books teachers might need, but overall it was really abandoned. Hugo made it to the study hall he had been to yesterday and cautiously walked inside. Aside from a few tables and chairs, the room was empty. He put his backpack on a table and took a spin. He took a deep breath and cleared his throat. "Hello, Kiara?" It was like his voice had an echo effect as it resounded across the room. He turned around and yelped when he noticed that Kiara had appeared in front of him. He took a step back but caught himself when he noticed she was smiling. "Hello," she said, waving at him again. "Hi," he smiled back. "I wanted to say sorry about yesterday. I kind of freaked out." He rubbed the back of his head and averted his gaze, embarrassment radiating off him. He looked back at her and saw that she had tilted her head and was poking her pointer fingers together. "No need to apologize. I was also freaked out. Nobody had ever seen me before." Hugo couldn't help but think that her shyness was cute. "You're the first one." She turned her eyes back to him but looked away again as she noticed he was staring at her as well. Hugo chuckled. "Well, I didn't know I could see ghosts as well." He frowned. "Wait, do you know that you're a ghost?" He had to ask. There were theories on the internet that people who were dead and reappeared as a ghost didn't know they were dead. He just wanted to make sure. Kiara nodded. "Yeah, I remember a little bit from when I died." She let the question of how she died hanging in the air. Hugo really wanted to know, but he also didn't want to intrude. By the way she reacted, it was not pleasant. "Sorry for asking." Hugo sat down on the table while Kiara hovered closer to him. "It's okay." She smiled at him again and he patted the spot next to him. Kiara blinked a couple times before slowly making her way over and sitting down on the wooden surface. It was colder with her next to him, but Hugo didn't mind. This was the first time he had ever spoken to a ghost, and he didn't really want it to end. "I must admit," he started, turning to her, "I'm really curious about you. Is there anything you could tell me from before you died?" He put on his best puppy eyes, and he could see the color on Kiara's cheeks becoming a bit darker. He counted that as a win. Wait, was he flirting with a ghost? "Well," her voice brought him out of his thoughts, and he saw her playing with her hair, looking off to the side. "I was born around 1965. I can't exactly remember when, but I died in the early 80s, so around that time. I was going to this high school, and..." She trailed off. "I died here too, so..." Her voice cracked. Hugo wanted to hug her. It must have been scary, being alone for almost 50 years. "Kiara?" She looked at him. "I really want to hug you right now, but I'm scared I will go through you." He raised a brow. She giggled and reached out her hand. She softly put it on his cheek, and while it was cold, it did not go through his flesh. She recoiled in shock and looked at her palm. She looked back at him and her hand again. Hugo watched her in amusement, weirdly happy that she was too. Kiara reached out to him again, but this time to his hair. She ran her fingers through his curly hair, and he had to admit that it felt nice. Her hand was cold and his head was warm, so it felt good. Kiara giggled again and Hugo chuckled. "Can I hug you now?" he asked. Kiara looked elated and wrapped her arms around his neck, leaning in. Hugo in return wrapped his arms around her back and put his head in her neck. She did the same, and they just held each other for a couple moments. It was weird hugging a ghost, but surprisingly comfortable. "Thank you, Hugo," she whispered in his ear. Hugo blinked and moved his hands to her waist to slightly push her back so he could look at her face. She pouted when she could no longer hug him. He squinted at her. "How do you know my name?" he cautiously asked. Kiara giggled again and grinned. "It was on your notebook. I was watching you for a while before I said something yesterday." She sheepishly looked at the side, the grin not leaving her face. Hugo rolled his eyes and shook his head. "Alright, I guess. Though you shouldn't spy on people." He poked her nose, still fascinated that his hand didn't go through her. She crinkled her nose and raised a brow. It was like the shy girl from moments ago was almost gone. "People can't see me. It doesn't matter if I spy on them or not." She looked a bit sad, and Hugo wanted to slap it off her face. He did not, but it was just a thought that went through his head to try and get her to smile again. Although slapping her probably would have made her even more sad, or maybe even angry. He had to try and get her to focus on something else. "Are you good at math?" He released her waist and she lowered her arms. She nodded and Hugo jumped off the table, shocking Kiara, who flew back into the air. "I noticed that you knew how to look at the formulas, and I really need to get my homework done. Will you help me?" He held up his backpack and a smile wormed its way back up her face. Hugo got out his math book and stuff to get started. He sat down, on a chair this time, and let Kiara hover next to him. She helped him through the rest of his homework, and he was surprised that he understood parts of it now. The way she explained it made it sound easy. He had to ask his teachers why he didn't just explain it like this in the beginning, instead of giving them a damn formula for a formula that did nothing to help them whatsoever. Hugo stretched his arms above his head and heard a satisfying crack in his back. They hadn't been going at it for too long, but he had been very attentive. He fished his phone from his pocket and checked the time. "What's that?" He turned to Kiara, who had her full attention to the phone in his hand. Hugo blinked. "That's right. She didn't grow up with a smartphone." "It's a phone." He showed her the screen and tapped it on. "You can call with it and even send messages to other people. It's basically a portable phone. Pretty much everyone has one nowadays." Her eyes sparkled at the device as Hugo showed her some apps and what they did. "That is really cool. I wish I had something like that back when I was alive." She suddenly had a far-off look on her face. "I might still be alive if I had something like that," she mumbled. Hugo still heard it. He decided not to ask about it. Kiara was already very closed off about her death, and he didn't want to push her. He was so curious, though. "Well, you can use it whenever I'm here. I don't mind." He shrugged. It was quiet for a bit too long, and he locked eyes with Kiara. She looked shocked, surprised. You want to come back?" Her voice cracked, and a ghost tear fell down her cheek. Hugo smiled. "Of course." He grabbed her hand. "I like hanging out with you. You may be dead, but that doesn't mean we can't be friends." Kiara squeezed his hand hard. She put her other hand over her mouth, trying to keep her sobs from coming out. She was unsuccessful. "I'm sorry," she hiccuped, fanning her face to try and keep her tears in. It didn't do much. No one really liked me back then. They only used me. Thank you." She gave him a watery smile. Hugo stood up and pulled her into a hug. It felt like his heart was torn to pieces by her words. She was probably bullied when she was alive. Those are the worst kind of people. I'll be back tomorrow, after school, I promise, he murmured in her hair. Kiara nodded and squeezed him one last time before letting go. Hugo shared a smile with her, but it was very watery for the both of them. He hadn't even realized that he'd started crying as well. Kiara wiped away his tears and did the same to her own. Tomorrow, I promise, she whispered, before her body started to fade. Hugo saw her body disappear before his eyes and gaped. It was kind of cool to see that. He shook his head. Not the time to think about that. He grabbed his stuff and put them back in his backpack. Before he walked out the door, he looked back into the study room and smiled. See you soon, Kiara, he called out. He heard a soft giggle and it sent shivers down his spine. He walked out the door and gently closed it behind him. Wow. He was actually friends with a ghost. Who knew his life could take that weird of a turn?